With a heart-stopping, grinding, metallic scream, the Mercedes flipped through the torrential downpour. Alaric had no desire to play the hero. He only wanted to get his 5-year-old daughter home safely. But old Navy medic instincts refused to die quietly. Dragging the bleeding woman from the mangled wreckage, he had no idea he was rescuing a billionaire. More importantly, he couldn't have known that this single act of salvation would completely unravel the only family he had left. The heater in the 2004 Ford F-150 had given out somewhere around Thanksgiving. By early March, the cab was just a mobile icebox. Alaric gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale under the dashboard's faint green glow. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against a torrential downpour. In the rearview mirror, Lily was fast asleep. Her head slumped against the window, breath fogging the glass. She looked so small, wrapped in his old, oversized flannel. 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, and carrying the weight of a world that hadn't been kind to either of them. Alaric turned the radio down. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt of Highway 9. He was calculating the grocery budget in his head. Rice, beans, maybe a cheap cut of chicken if the utility bill was lower than expected, when the night tore open. It happened in a fraction of a second. A black Mercedes G-Wagon, taking the slick curve entirely too fast, hydroplaned. Alaric watched the heavy vehicle lose traction, the rear tires kicking out. It hit the concrete median at 70 miles an hour. The impact sounded like a bomb going off. Metal crumpled. Glass exploded outward in a glittering wave. The SUV flipped, landing violently on its roof and skidding another 40 feet before slamming into a steel light pole. Then, silence. Just the drumming of the rain. Alaric slammed on the brakes, the Ford fishtailing slightly before coming to a halt on the shoulder. He threw it into park. He didn't think. The civilian part of his brain, the tired, broke, single father, shut down. The Fleet Marine Force corpsman woke up. "Lily," he said, his voice sharp. She jolted awake, blinking in the dark. "Daddy, stay in your seat. Do not unbuckle. Do not open the door." He reached behind his seat and hauled out the olive-drab medical bag he took everywhere. "Look at me, Bug." Lily stared at him, her wide eyes reflecting the flashing hazard lights. "I'll be right back. Stay put." Alaric kicked his door open and stepped into the storm. The rain hit him like freezing needles. The smell hit him first: vaporized antifreeze, hot engine oil, and the sharp metallic tang of blood. He sprinted toward the mangled SUV. The driver's side was crushed inward. The front axle was snapped, a tire rolling lazily into the ditch. Alaric dropped to his knees in the puddles beside the shattered window. Inside, a woman was hanging upside down by her seatbelt. The airbags had deployed, deflating into powdery white rags. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face with blood pouring from a jagged gash on her hairline. She was unconscious. "Hey," Alaric barked, shining a pen light into the cab. He checked for pooling gasoline. None yet, but the engine was hissing ominously. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He reached through the broken window, carefully pressing 2 fingers to her carotid artery. The pulse was there. Fast. Thready. Shock was setting in. He didn't have time to wait for the fire department. The crushed roof was pressing dangerously close to her cervical spine, and if the engine block sparked, she'd burn alive. Alaric pulled a webbing strap from his bag. He leaned into the wreckage, ignoring the jagged glass biting into his forearms. He wrapped his arm across her chest to support her weight, bracing his shoulder against the steering column. With his free hand, he sliced the seatbelt with a trauma shear. Gravity took her. Alaric caught her dead weight, grunting as his bad knee screamed in protest. He dragged her out through the shattered window, mindful of her neck, moving backward across the wet pavement. He got her a safe distance away and laid her flat on her back. Rain washed the blood from her face. She was young, maybe early 30s, dressed in a tailored blazer that probably cost more than his truck. "Come on," Alaric muttered, tilting her chin slightly to open her airway. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, jagged gasps. He grabbed a gauze pad and slapped it against her forehead, applying pressure. "Daddy?" Alaric's head snapped up. Lily was standing 3 feet away, shivering in her pajamas, getting soaked in the freezing rain. "Lily, I told you to stay in the truck," Alaric yelled, panic spiking. Lily pointed a small, trembling finger at the woman on the ground. "Her shoulder hurts, Daddy." Alaric looked down. He hadn't noticed it in the dark. The woman's right arm was sitting completely wrong. The shoulder was dislocated anteriorly, the humerus bone jutting sharply forward under the soaked fabric of her expensive blazer. It was pressing hard against the skin, restricting blood flow. In this cold, leaving it like that could cause permanent nerve damage. The woman groaned, her eyelids fluttering. Pain was waking her up. "Hold this," Alaric said. He grabbed Lily's tiny hand and pressed it over his own, keeping the gauze on the woman's head. "Just hold it right there, Bug. Don't look at her arm." The woman's eyes opened. They were a piercing, icy blue, entirely unclouded despite the head trauma. She looked at the rain, then at Alaric. "Don't move," Alaric commanded. "You were in a wreck. Your shoulder is out of the socket. I'm going to put it back." "Who?" she croaked, her voice trembling. "Don't touch me. I don't have painkillers, and the ambulance is at least 10 minutes out. If I don't set this now, you might lose function in your hand." Alaric didn't wait for permission. He positioned himself beside her. "Take a deep breath." She inhaled sharply. Alaric gripped her wrist and her elbow. He applied steady, brutal traction, pulling her arm away from her body and gently rotating it outward. The woman let out a strangled, breathless scream. Pop! The joint slid back into the socket. The woman's head slammed back against the pavement, her chest heaving as the immediate, blinding pressure vanished. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm. Red and blue lights began to bounce off the low-hanging clouds. Alaric checked the gauze on her head. The bleeding was slowing. He unzipped his jacket, taking it off and throwing it over her shivering chest to stave off the hypothermia. "We have to go," Alaric said to Lily. He scooped his daughter up in his arms, grabbed his medical bag, and turned away. "Wait," the woman gasped from the ground, reaching out with her good hand. Her fingers brushed the denim of his jeans. "Who are you?" Alaric didn't answer. The first cruiser was pulling up, tires screeching. Alaric threw Lily into the truck, slammed the door, and got behind the wheel. He started the engine, threw it into drive, and merged back onto the highway before the paramedics even stepped out of their rig. Evelyn Croft did not do vulnerability. She sat up in the ICU bed, glaring at the heart monitor as if she could intimidate it into beating slower. Her right arm was in a sling. A neat row of 12 stitches tracked across her left temple. Her ribs felt like shattered porcelain, but she refused the morphine. Morphine made her sloppy. Evelyn hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar medical tech empire by being sloppy. The door opened. Hayes walked in. Hayes was Evelyn's shadow. Fixer, head of security, and the only person on her payroll who wasn't terrified of her. He handed her a steaming cup of black coffee and a tablet. The stock took a 2% dip when the news of the crash leaked, Hayes said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "Board is nervous. I issued a statement saying you walked away with minor scrapes." "I did," Evelyn said, taking the coffee with her left hand. She winced as a sharp pain lanced through her chest. "The car? Totaled. Cops say you hydroplaned." Hayes watched her carefully. "EMS found you on the shoulder of the highway. Shoulder popped back into place, head wound packed. You were covered in a cheap canvas jacket. First responders said someone worked on you before they got there, but the scene was empty. Evelyn closed her eyes. The memory was fragmented. Glass, cold rain, a man with rough hands and tired eyes, and a little girl. A little girl standing in the pouring rain, staring at her. Her shoulder hurts, Daddy. Find him, Evelyn said. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You want to send a thank you card? I don't like owing debts, Hayes. Whoever he is, he saved my arm, maybe my life. Evelyn set the coffee down. He knew what he was doing. The traction technique he used, it was textbook. He wasn't a bystander. Find him. Cut him a check. Let's zero the ledger. Hayes nodded once. I'll pull the traffic cams. Across the city, in a neighborhood where the streetlights were mostly shot out, Alaric was fighting his own battles. The apartment smelled like mildew and cheap laundry detergent. The kitchen sink had a leak he'd been trying to patch with duct tape for 2 weeks. He stood at the counter, carefully pouring boiling water over 2 bowls of instant macaroni. His right knee throbbed a deep, relentless ache. It always did when it rained, a permanent souvenir from an IED in Helmand Province. But tonight it was worse. Dragging 130 pounds of dead weight out of a crushed car had agitated the torn ligaments. Dinner, Alaric called out. Lily padded into the kitchen. She had changed into dry pajamas, a pair of faded Batman pants that were slightly too short for her. She climbed onto a wobbly wooden stool and pulled her bowl close. Is the lady dead? Lily asked casually, blowing on her noodles. Alaric stopped mid-bite. He looked at his daughter. No, Bug, she's not dead. The doctors are taking care of her now. She was bleeding. I know. You fixed her. I just helped her until the ambulance got there. Alaric rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. Eat your dinner. We've got a big day tomorrow. Lily didn't press it. She just ate in silence. Alaric walked over to the small, scuffed dining table that served as his desk. He opened a stack of mail. A final notice from the electric company. A medical bill for Lily's asthma inhalers. Insurance had denied the claim again. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket and counted the cash inside. $64. He was working under the table at a mechanic's garage in the South Ward, making just enough to keep the lights on. He couldn't apply for a formal job. Background checks meant paperwork. Paperwork meant the system would look closely at him. And if the system looked closely at Alaric Pendleton, they would look closely at Lily. He couldn't risk that. Not after what happened 5 years ago. He looked at the framed photograph sitting on the windowsill. It was a picture of a smiling woman with auburn hair holding a newborn baby. Sarah. The ache in his chest was sharper than the pain in his knee. I'm trying, Sarah, he whispered to the empty room. I swear to God, I'm trying. Alaric folded the electric bill, tossed it into the trash can, and walked back to the kitchen to wash the dishes. He didn't want a medal for what he did on the highway. He just wanted the world to leave him alone. But the world rarely listens to men like Alaric. It took Hayes 48 hours. Traffic cam at the intersection of Highway 9 and Miller Road caught a 2004 Ford F-150 speeding away 2 minutes after the 911 call, Hayes said, dropping a manila folder onto Evelyn's pristine glass desk. Plates were muddy, but I ran the partials against vehicles registered in a 20-mile radius. Found a match. Evelyn was signing documents with her left hand, her right arm still immobilized. She didn't look up. Who is it? Name is Alaric Pendleton, 32 years old, former Navy corpsman, honorable discharge 6 years ago, spotty employment history since, currently residing in a low-income complex on the east side. Evelyn stopped writing. She looked at the folder. A medic. That explains the shoulder. I have the checkbook, Hayes said. Standard life-saving gratuity, 50 grand? I'll deliver it. Hayes frowned. Evelyn, the neighborhood is a cesspool. Let me send a courier. He saved my life, Hayes. The least I can do is look him in the eye when I pay him off. Evelyn stood up, smoothing the front of her designer slacks. Bring the car around. 30 minutes later, a sleek, armored Lincoln Navigator rolled into the parking lot of the Sunnyside Apartments. The irony of the name wasn't lost on Evelyn. The stucco was peeling, the gutters were rusted, and a group of teenagers smoking on the corner stared openly at the luxury vehicle. Evelyn stepped out. She wore a camel trench coat over her sling. She checked the unit number Hayes had texted her and walked up the concrete stairs to the second floor. Unit 2B. She raised her hand and knocked. Heavy footsteps approached. The deadbolt slid back with a loud clack. The door opened. It was him. In the daylight, he looked worse. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He wore a faded gray t-shirt stained with motor oil and a pair of worn-out jeans. He stared at her, his expression hardening immediately. "Can I help you?" Alaric asked, his voice low and defensive. Evelyn offered a tight, practiced smile. "Mr. Pendleton, my name is Evelyn Croft. I believe we met 2 nights ago on Highway 9. Alaric didn't blink. He looked at her sling, then at the expensive car idling in the parking lot. "You shouldn't have come here." "I don't like leaving loose ends," Evelyn said smoothly. She reached into her coat pocket with her good hand and pulled out an envelope. "You saved me from a very bad outcome. I am deeply appreciative. This is a token of my gratitude." She held out the envelope. Alaric didn't take it. "I don't want your money," Alaric said. Evelyn's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Pendleton, let's not play games. I know where you live. I know you work at a garage. Everyone needs money. Take the check." "I did what anyone would do," Alaric said, his tone devoid of warmth. "I don't need a payout. Have a good day, Miss Croft." He started to close the door. "Wait," Evelyn said, stepping forward, her leather boot wedging against the doorframe. "Just wait." Alaric glared at her foot. "Move it, or I'll break that shoulder again." Before Evelyn could fire back, a voice called out from inside the apartment. "Daddy, is it the landlord again?" Lily appeared behind Alaric. She was holding a blue crayon and a piece of construction paper. She peered around her father's legs, looking up at Evelyn. Evelyn froze. The breath left her lungs in a sudden, violent rush. The envelope slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the dirty welcome mat. She stared at the little girl, the auburn hair, the distinct, slight cleft in her chin. But it wasn't just the features. It was the eyes. Bright, piercing hazel eyes. "No," Evelyn's mind screamed. "No, that's impossible. 5 years ago. A rainy night. A settlement brokered by her father's lawyers to sweep a horrific tragedy under the rug. Evelyn had been driving drunk. She had run a red light. She had T-boned a station wagon. The police report said the mother died on impact. The infant daughter, the lawyers told Evelyn, hadn't survived the night in the ICU. Evelyn had paid $10 million to a shell corporation to make the criminal charges disappear. She had spent the last 5 years convincing herself she had paid her debt to the universe. Evelyn's eyes slowly lifted from the little girl to the man standing in the doorway. Alaric Pendleton. The name hadn't registered in the sterile environment of her office. But now, looking at his face, the realization hit her like a physical blow. He looked older, broken, hollowed out. But she recognized him from the courtroom sketches she had refused to look at. The grieving husband. The father who lost everything. Alaric watched the color drain from the billionaire's face. He saw her eyes lock onto Lily, saw the raw, naked terror bloom in her expression. He didn't know who Evelyn Croft was. He had never seen her face before. The lawyers had kept the drunk driver completely anonymous behind a wall of corporate NDAs and sealed court documents. But as Alaric looked at Evelyn staring at his daughter, a cold, dark instinct coiled in his gut. "Who are you?" Alaric demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Evelyn couldn't speak. She took a step back, her expensive boots scraping against the concrete. She had just looked into the eyes of the ghost she created, the little girl who wasn't supposed to be alive, the man whose life she had destroyed, and he was the one who had just saved hers. Evelyn didn't breathe until the heavy steel door of Unit 2B clicked shut. She backed away slowly, her hand gripping the cold iron railing of the walkway. The peeling paint dug into her palm, grounding her, proving she was awake. Her heart hammered against her fractured ribs, a violent, erratic rhythm that made black spots dance in her peripheral vision. She turned and practically fell down the concrete stairs. Hayes was out of the navigator before she reached the bottom step. He saw the color of her face, a sickly ash gray, and reached for his holstered sidearm. "Evelyn, what happened?" Hayes asked, stepping between her and the stairwell. His eyes scanned the courtyard, looking for a threat. "Get me in the car!" Evelyn choked out. "Just get me in the car!" Hayes opened the rear door. Evelyn collapsed into the plush leather seat. She pulled her knees up, mindless of the agony shooting through her dislocated shoulder, and pressed her forehead against the tinted window. Hayes climbed into the driver's seat and threw the heavy SUV into gear. "Hospital? Home." The word barely made it past her lips. As the navigator rolled out of the fractured asphalt of the Sunnyside apartments, Evelyn closed her eyes. It didn't help. The darkness only made the memory sharper. November. 5 years ago. The charity gala. She had consumed 4 martinis. Maybe 5. She remembered the fight with her father over the impending IPO. She remembered grabbing her keys, furious, convinced she was untouchable. The rain was sleet that night. The traffic light at the intersection of 4th and Main was a blurry, bleeding red. She hadn't even touched the brakes. The sound of the impact had haunted her for years, a sickening, hollow crunch of tearing metal and shattering glass. A silver station wagon crushed inward like a discarded soda can. Then, the hospital. The lawyers. Her father's fixer, a man named Richard, standing at the foot of her bed with a grim face. The mother died on the table, Evie. The baby didn't make it through the night. The husband is a mess. We are handling it. It's a tragedy, but we are handling it. Handling it. Evelyn opened her eyes. The opulent interior of the navigator felt like a cage. They had paid $10 million to a blind trust. They had flooded the local news with stories of a tragic weather-related accident, burying her name under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and sealed juvenile records. The baby didn't make it, but the little girl in the doorway had Sarah Pendleton's auburn hair. She had the exact same cleft chin from the police file photographs Evelyn had secretly looked at once, right before throwing up in her private bathroom. It was her. It was the child. Back in Unit 2B, Alaric stood motionless for a long time. He stared at the cheap veneer of his front door. His chest felt tight. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing up. 6 years as a Fleet Marine Force corpsman had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He knew what a threat looked like. He knew the smell of danger. The billionaire CEO didn't look grateful. She looked terrified. Alaric opened the door a crack. The courtyard was empty. He looked down at the muddy welcome mat. The envelope was still there, a crisp, thick piece of stationery. He picked it up. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. It was heavy with the weight of someone trying to buy silence or absolution. "Daddy?" Alaric turned. Lily was standing by the couch, clutching her worn-out stuffed bear. "Who was that lady?" Lily asked. Alaric walked over and knelt down, forcing a smile he didn't feel. He tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Just someone who was lost, Bug. She got the wrong apartment." She looked sad. "Yeah," Alaric murmured, his eyes drifting back to the door. "I think she was." He waited until Lily went back to her coloring book before he moved. He went to his bedroom closet. Beneath a stack of old winter coats was a black canvas duffel bag, his go bag. It held $2,000 in cash he'd scraped together over 5 years, 3 fake IDs, his old medical kit, and a prepaid burner phone. He unzipped the bag and stared at the contents. He had spent 5 years looking over his shoulder. 5 years of working under the table, living in slums, pulling Lily out of school the second he saw a cop car idling too long on their street. He had thought he was safe here. He had thought the ghosts had finally stopped hunting them. He touched the envelope in his pocket. Evelyn Croft. A billionaire. Alaric's jaw tightened. Wealthy people didn't come to the South Ward out of the goodness of their hearts. They came because they wanted something, or because they were hiding something. He didn't know the connection yet, but he knew one thing. It was time to run again. The penthouse overlooked the city skyline, a sprawling expanse of glass and steel that Evelyn owned a significant piece of. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Evelyn sat in a leather armchair in the dark. She hadn't bothered to turn on the lights. Her left hand held a tumbler of neat scotch. She hadn't taken a sip. The elevator dinged. Heavy footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. "I canceled your morning meetings," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the silence. He stopped a few feet away, a shadow in the dim room. "Board is agitated. They want to see you." "Hayes," Evelyn's voice was a dry rasp. "Who handled the settlement 5 years ago?" Silence. The air in the room shifted, growing heavier. "Richard," Hayes finally said, "before he retired." "Why?" "Where is the file?" "Evelyn, those records were sealed and buried deep. Even I don't have access to the raw files. It was handled to protect the company." "I don't care about the company right now," Evelyn snapped, throwing the heavy crystal tumbler against the wall. It shattered, raining glass and amber liquor onto the Persian rug. She stood up, ignoring the blinding pain in her shoulder. "That man, Alaric Pendleton. I want to know everything about him. I want to know what happened after the crash." Hayes didn't flinch at the broken glass. He looked at her calmly. "You know what happened. You paid the family. They signed an NDA." "They lied to me, Hayes," Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking. "My father, Richard, the whole damn legal team. They looked me in the eye and told me the baby died. I just saw her. I just looked into her eyes." Hayes stiffened. For the first time in 10 years, the unflappable fixer looked genuinely rattled. "That's not possible. The death certificate was forged," Evelyn finished for him, her breathing ragged. "Or buried, or ignored. Alaric Pendleton didn't sign an NDA, did he?" Hayes hesitated. He pulled a secure tablet from his jacket, his thumbs flying across the screen. He accessed a partitioned server, bypassing 3 levels of encryption. He read in silence for 2 full minutes. The blue light from the screen illuminated the deepening lines on his face. "Talk to me," Evelyn demanded. Hayes lowered the tablet. "He didn't sign." "Explain." "Your father offered him $5 million, then 10. Pendleton rejected it. He went to the police. He wanted a blood test from the night of the crash. He wanted to prove you were intoxicated." Hayes swallowed hard. "He wanted you in prison." Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her. "So what did my father do?" "He did what he always did. He protected the asset." Hayes looked away, staring out at the rain. The IPO was 6 weeks away. A vehicular manslaughter charge against the CEO's daughter would have tanked the valuation. Richard pulled some strings. The blood samples were lost in a clerical error. The police report was scrubbed of any mention of alcohol. And Alaric? Alaric kept pushing. So, Richard pushed back. Hayes's voice grew clinical, detached, reading from the sins of the past. They hired a private military contractor to run a deep background check. Found out Pendleton had severe PTSD from his tours in Afghanistan. They used it. They flagged his medical license, got him fired from his clinic. They froze his bank accounts under the guise of an IRS audit. Evelyn felt bile rise in her throat. We ruined him. Worse, Hayes said quietly. When Pendleton still wouldn't back down, Richard tipped off Child Protective Services. He manufactured a file claiming Pendleton was having violent psychotic breaks and neglecting his infant daughter. CPS was hours away from taking the child into state custody. Evelyn covered her mouth with her left hand, a sob tearing from her throat. Pendleton realized he couldn't win, Hayes continued. He couldn't fight a billion-dollar legal team. They were going to take his daughter. So he took her and ran. He went entirely off the grid. To the world, the baby was classified as deceased in the initial PR fallout, and Richard just let the media run with it. It made you look like a tragic figure who made a terrible mistake, rather than a murderer on trial. Evelyn sank to her knees among the shattered glass. The scotch soaked into her slacks, stinging her skin. She had spent 5 years believing she had paid her debt. She had built hospitals, donated to orphanages, and convinced herself she was a good person who had experienced a terrible accident. But it was all a lie. Her entire life was a monument built on the ashes of Alaric Pendleton's world. They hadn't just killed his wife. They had stolen his career, his dignity, and his safety. They had forced him to raise his daughter in the shadows, terrified of the light. And 2 nights ago, that same man had pulled her from a burning car, set her dislocated shoulder, and saved her life. Find him, Evelyn whispered to the floor. Evelyn, if we approach him. Find him, Hayes, she roared, looking up, her icy blue eyes bloodshot and wide. I don't care what it takes. We owe him everything. Across the city, Alaric was losing his battle. He had packed the go-bag. He had mapped a route to a small town in Oregon where he knew a guy who could get him a job at a logging camp. No questions asked. But as he zipped the bag shut, a sound came from the bedroom. It was a cough. Not a normal cough. A deep, rattling wheeze that sounded like tearing wet paper. Alaric dropped the bag and sprinted into the room. Lily was sitting up in bed, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, and her lips were taking on a terrifying bluish tint. Her shoulders heaved as she fought to draw air into her narrowed airways. "Daddy!" she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "Can't breathe!" "I got you, Bug. I'm right here." Alaric's hands flew to his medical bag. He grabbed her albuterol inhaler. He pressed it to her lips and squeezed. Lily inhaled, but the medication barely reached her lungs. The inflammation was too severe. She coughed violently, her tiny body shaking. Alaric checked her pulse. Fast. Too fast. She was going into severe respiratory distress. The weather, the cold, the stress of the past 2 days. It had triggered a massive asthma attack. Okay, Alaric muttered, trying to keep his voice calm while his heart pounded against his ribs. He carried her into the bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as it would go, and closed the door to create a steam room. 10 minutes passed. The steam did nothing. Lily's breathing grew shallower. The blue around her lips deepened. Alaric's medical training was screaming at him. She needed a nebulizer. She needed intravenous steroids. She needed a hospital, immediately. But a hospital meant IDs. It meant insurance forms. It meant the system would log Lily Pendleton into a database. It meant the people who had hunted them 5 years ago might find them. He looked at his daughter, gasping for life in his arms. There was no choice. To hell with the system. To hell with the billionaires. He grabbed the keys to the Ford, wrapped Lily in a thick blanket, and ran out into the storm. The emergency room of St. Jude's Medical Center was a chaotic blur of fluorescent lights, shouting nurses, and the smell of antiseptic. Alaric burst through the sliding doors, his clothes soaked through, carrying Lily in his arms. "I need help!" Alaric yelled, his voice cracking the sterile hum of the waiting room. "She's in severe respiratory distress, history of asthma, albuterol isn't responding." A triage nurse took one look at Lily's blue lips and slammed a red button on the desk. "Get a gurney. Peds trauma, room 3. They took her from him. Alaric tried to follow, his boots squeaking on the linoleum, but a burly orderly put a hand on his chest. "Sir, you have to stay here. Let them work." Alaric stood frozen, watching the doors swing shut behind his daughter. His hands were shaking. The phantom weight of her frail body still lingered in his arms. "Sir?" The receptionist was calling him from behind a plexiglass window. "I need your information. Name and insurance." Alaric walked over. He gave his rehearsed alias. "John Miller. I don't have insurance. I'll pay cash." The receptionist began typing. "Child's name?" Alaric hesitated, just for a second. If he said Lily Pendleton, the alarms would trip. But if he lied, and they needed her medical history, a drug interaction could kill her. "Lily?" he said quietly. "Lily Pendleton." The receptionist typed it in. She frowned at the screen. "Sir, I'm getting a flagged alert on this name. Are you the legal guardian?" Alaric felt the walls closing in. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. "I am her father. Just treat my daughter." He backed away and collapsed into a plastic waiting room chair. He put his head in his hands. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20. Every second felt like an eternity. He prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Take me. Do whatever you want to me. Just let her breathe." The sliding doors of the ER hissed open again. Alaric didn't look up until he heard the distinct click of expensive heels on the linoleum. He raised his head. Evelyn Croft was walking toward him. She wasn't wearing the pristine trench coat anymore. She was soaked in rain, her hair plastered to her face, the sling still supporting her right arm. Hayes flanked her, scanning the room like a hawk. Alaric stood up. His blood ran cold. How did she find him? It hadn't even been an hour. Evelyn walked straight to the receptionist. She pulled out a sleek black titanium card and placed it on the counter. "Whatever the Pendleton girl needs. The VIP pediatric wing. Put the best pulmonologist in the city on her case. Bill it directly to the Croft Foundation." The receptionist's eyes widened at the name. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Evelyn turned and looked at Alaric. Alaric's fists clenched. His mind raced. She had tracked him. She was paying for the hospital. It was a power play. She was trying to trap him, trying to finish what her lawyers had started 5 years ago. He closed the distance between them, stepping into Evelyn's personal space. Hayes shifted his stance, but Evelyn held up her left hand, stopping him. "What are you doing here?" Alaric hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "How did you find me?" "The hospital system," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked terrified of him. "My company built the software. When her name was entered, it flagged in my database. I came as fast as I could." "I don't want your money," Alaric spat, his eyes wild. "I don't want your help. Tell your goon to back off before I tear him apart. You stay away from my daughter." "Alaric," Evelyn said. His name felt heavy on her tongue. He flinched. He hadn't told her his first name at the apartment. "You don't understand," Evelyn said, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She didn't care who was watching in the waiting room. She didn't care about the optics. The armor of the billionaire CEO melted away, leaving only a broken, guilt-ridden woman. "I didn't know." Alaric frowned, the anger fracturing into confusion. "Didn't know what?" Evelyn took a trembling breath, the stitches on her temple pulled taut. "I didn't know she survived. I didn't know what my father's lawyers did to you." The ER dissolved around Alaric. The hum of the vending machine, the ticking clock, the distant sirens, everything faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He stared at Evelyn. He looked at the icy blue eyes, the blonde hair. He had never seen the driver. He had only seen the twisted wreckage of his station wagon. The police had kept him away from the ambulance. The courtroom sketches had been vague, showing a woman with her head bowed. Croft. The name echoed in his skull. The Croft family. The medical tech empire. The billions of dollars. "No," Alaric whispered, stumbling back a step. Evelyn dropped her gaze to the floor. She couldn't look at him anymore. The shame was too immense. "It was raining. I was angry. I had been drinking. I ran the light. I'm so sorry, Alaric. I am so sorry." The pieces fell into place with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. The woman he had dragged from the crushed Mercedes. The woman whose fractured skull he had wrapped, whose dislocated shoulder he had carefully reset. The woman he had saved with his bare hands. It was her. It was the drunk driver who had crushed Sarah. It was the woman who had stolen his wife. Alaric's knees buckled. He didn't yell. He didn't attack her. He just fell. He hit the linoleum floor with a heavy thud, his hands gripping his hair. A sound tore from his throat. A jagged, horrific sound that wasn't a cry, but the noise a soul makes when it is finally, completely ripped in half. He had spent 5 years hiding in the dark, starving, terrified, mourning his dead wife. And the universe, in its sick, twisted cruelty, had made him the savior of her murderer. Evelyn sank to her knees right in front of him. She didn't reach out to touch him. She didn't have the right. She just knelt on the dirty hospital floor in her designer clothes, weeping with him. "They told me the baby died," Evelyn sobbed, her voice echoing in the quiet waiting room. "They told me you took the money and went away. If I had known they threatened to take her from you, I would have burned the company to the ground myself." Alaric couldn't hear her. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, the PTSD pulling him into a dark, suffocating spiral. He saw Sarah's face. He saw the crushed metal. He felt the slick blood on his hands from 2 nights ago. "You," Alaric choked out, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You killed her. You took my wife." "I did," Evelyn confessed, bowing her head. "I did, and I will spend the rest of my life paying for it. But right now you have to let me save your daughter." Alaric looked at the swinging doors of the pediatric trauma wing. He looked back at Evelyn. The anger in his chest was a roaring inferno, begging him to wrap his hands around her throat and finish the job the car crash had started. But then he thought of Lily. Blue lips, gasping for air. He was a father before he was a widower. He was a medic before he was an avenger. Alaric slowly lowered his hands. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes dead, hollowed out by a betrayal too massive to comprehend. "If she dies," Alaric whispered, his voice as cold as the grave. "I'll kill you. I won't need a lawyer. I won't need a trial. I'll just kill you." Evelyn looked him in the eye. She didn't flinch. She nodded slowly. "I know," she said. A doctor in blue scrubs pushed through the swinging doors. He looked around the waiting room, his eyes landing on Alaric on the floor. "Mr. Pendleton?" the doctor called out. Alaric scrambled to his feet, his bad knee screaming in protest, the hatred for Evelyn instantly overshadowed by the terror for his child. He ran toward the doctor. Evelyn stayed on her knees on the floor. She watched the man whose life she had ruined run toward his daughter. She knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what happened next, her life as she knew it was over. The empire was going to burn, and she was going to be the one to light the match. The doctor smelled like stale coffee and hand sanitizer. He pulled his surgical mask down, his eyes lingering on Alaric's oil-stained clothes before flicking to the clipboard in his hands. "Mr. Pendleton," the doctor said, his voice a low, measured hum. "Your daughter is stabilized. We had to intubate her briefly to bypass the upper airway inflammation and administer intravenous corticosteroids, but she's breathing on her own now." Alaric let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for 5 years. He leaned his back against the cold cinder block wall of the hallway and slid down until he was sitting on the floor. "Can I see her?" Alaric asked, his voice cracking. "In a moment. They are moving her to a private room in the pediatric ICU, but we need to have a serious conversation first." The doctor crouched down to Alaric's level. "Lily went into status asthmaticus. It's a severe, prolonged asthma attack that doesn't respond to standard bronchodilators. I ran a toxicology and allergen screen." Alaric looked up, dread pooling in his stomach. "Her lungs are heavily saturated with black mold spores," the doctor said, his tone turning clinical and sharp. "And she is severely malnourished. Whatever environment she has been living in is killing her. If she goes back to it, the next attack will be fatal. I cannot legally discharge her unless I am confident she is returning to a safe, sanitized home." The words hit Alaric harder than a physical blow. He had run to protect her. He had lived in the shadows, taken under-the-table jobs, and rented from slumlords who didn't ask for social security numbers. He thought he was saving her from the system. Instead, he had locked her in a box of poison. His poverty, his paranoia, it had almost finished the job the car crash started. "I understand," Alaric whispered, burying his face in his hands. "I'll give you 10 minutes, then you can go in," the doctor said, patting Alaric's shoulder awkwardly before walking away. Across town, a different kind of reckoning was beginning. The Croft estate sat on 40 acres of prime real estate in the northern hills. It was a sprawling, Gothic revival mansion of limestone and slate. Evelyn didn't wait for the security gates to fully open. She gunned the engine of her backup car, a heavy Audi sedan, clipping the iron gate and tearing across the manicured lawn. She slammed the car into park at the front steps, leaving the engine running and the driver's door wide open. Hayes was already waiting in the foyer. He had tracked her phone. He didn't say a word as she marched past him, her boots leaving muddy prints on the imported marble floors. She found her father in his study. Charles Croft was a man carved from granite. At 68, he still possessed the intimidating, broad-shouldered presence that had allowed him to build a medical empire from scratch. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, sipping a glass of bourbon, a fire crackling in the hearth behind him. He looked up as Evelyn threw the double doors open. "Hayes called me," Charles said, his voice calm, entirely devoid of surprise. "He told me about your little trip to the hospital. You told me they died." Evelyn's voice didn't yell. It was deadly quiet, trembling with a rage so profound it felt cold. Charles sighed, setting his glass down. "Evelyn, sit down. You're hysterical. You just survived a major car accident. You have a concussion." "Don't manage me." Evelyn swept a hand across his desk, sending the bourbon glass and a stack of files crashing to the floor. The glass shattered. Charles didn't flinch. "You looked me in the eye while I was bleeding in a hospital bed 5 years ago, and you told me the baby was dead. You told me the husband took a settlement." "I protected you," Charles said, his tone hardening. "I protected this family, and I protected the company. You ruined a man's life, Evelyn screamed. You forged CPS documents. You froze his bank accounts. You hunted a grieving father who was suffering from PTSD until he had to take his infant daughter and hide in the slums. Her lungs are failing right now because of the mold in the apartment he was forced to live in to hide from us. Charles stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, an involuntary gesture of asserting authority. Do you have any idea what was at stake 5 years ago? The IPO was weeks away. We were about to secure $1 billion in capital to fund the pediatric oncology wing. If the media found out my daughter, the heir to the company, drunkenly killed a mother in a hit and run, the stock would have tanked. The investors would have walked. So you sacrificed Sarah Pendleton. People die every day, Evelyn. Charles looked at her with a chilling, sociopathic detachment. It was an accident, a tragedy, but I was not going to let your momentary lack of judgment destroy 20 years of my work. Richard handled it. He isolated the threat, neutralized the father's credibility, and buried the story. It was business. Evelyn stared at him. She had spent her entire adult life trying to earn this man's approval. She had cut her teeth in boardrooms, crushed competitors, and hardened her heart to become the ruthless CEO he wanted her to be. But looking at him now, bathed in the warm light of the fire, she didn't see a titan of industry. She saw a monster. And worse, she saw the architect of the monster she had become. It wasn't just business, Evelyn whispered, stepping backward. It was murder. You didn't just cover up my crime. You committed your own. And what are you going to do about it? Charles asked, a sneer curling his lip. Go to the police? The statute of limitations on most of Richard's white-collar tampering has passed. As for you, you'll go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. The board will vote you out by morning. You will lose your stock, your position, your entire life. Evelyn looked at her father. Her dislocated shoulder throbbed. The stitches on her temple burned. She thought of Alaric, falling to his knees on the dirty linoleum, the sound of his soul tearing in half. I know, Evelyn said. She turned her back on her father and walked out of the study. Hayes was standing in the hallway. He had heard everything. He looked at Evelyn, his expression unreadable. Call the legal team? Hayes asked quietly. No, Evelyn said, walking past him toward the front door. Call the district attorney. Tell him I'm coming in. And Hayes? Yes, Evelyn. Unlock the encrypted servers, the ones Richard used. Print everything. Hayes nodded once. It will burn the company to the ground. Good, Evelyn said, stepping out into the cold rain. Let it burn. Room 412 of the pediatric ICU was quiet, save for the rhythmic mechanical hiss of the oxygen concentrator. Lily looked incredibly small in the hospital bed. An IV was taped to the back of her tiny hand, pumping fluids and steroids into her bloodstream. A clear plastic mask covered her nose and mouth, delivering pure, clean oxygen. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Alaric sat in a plastic chair pulled tight against the bed rail. He held her free hand, his thumb gently tracing the knuckles. He hadn't slept in 3 days. He hadn't eaten. He was operating on fumes and a raw, burning adrenaline. The door clicked open. Alaric didn't turn around. He knew the sound of those footsteps. Evelyn stepped into the room. She looked exhausted. The tailored clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, dark gray sweater and slacks. She didn't look like a billionaire anymore. She looked like a ghost. She carried a thick, heavy manila folder. She stopped at the foot of the bed, her eyes fixed on Lily. The doctor says she's going to make a full recovery, Evelyn said softly. Alaric gently placed Lily's hand back on the mattress. He stood up, turning to face Evelyn. The hostility from the waiting room was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. He looked at her not with anger, but with the weary disgust reserved for a cockroach. Why are you here? Alaric asked. Didn't you do enough? I came to give you this. Evelyn set the manila folder on the rolling tray table at the foot of the bed. Alaric looked at it. If that's a check, I will force you to eat it. It's not money. Evelyn took a step back, putting distance between them. It's a timeline. It's emails, bank records, and internal memos. It proves my father hired a fixer named Richard to bribe the medical examiner who took my blood at the night of the crash. It proves they fabricated the CPS reports against you to force you into hiding. It is the complete, unredacted paper trail of how Croft Medical destroyed your life to protect its IPO. Alaric stared at the folder. He felt a slow, heavy pulse beating in his temples. Why? Alaric asked, his voice rough. Because you were right, Evelyn said, her icy blue eyes meeting his. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. I killed your wife. I was drunk and I was reckless, and I took her from you. I didn't know they covered it up. I didn't know you were out there suffering. But my ignorance doesn't absolve me. Alaric stepped towards the table. He rested his hand on the rough paper of the folder. Inside were the answers he had spent 5 years agonizing over. The proof that he wasn't crazy. The proof that a massive, invisible hand had orchestrated his descent into hell. If I take this to the police, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, your father goes to federal prison for a very long time. The SEC will dismantle his company. Yes. And you? Alaric looked up at her. You go to jail for vehicular manslaughter. The cover-up voids your statute of limitations. They'll lock you in a cage. I know. Evelyn reached into her pocket with her left hand and pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope. She placed it next to the folder. This is a legally binding, irrevocable trust, Evelyn said. I liquidated my personal assets this morning, $50 million. It's in Lily's name, with you as the sole executor. It's completely untraceable to Croft Medical, so when the government seizes the corporate assets, this money remains untouched. It's tax-free. It's clean. Alaric let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You think you can buy my forgiveness? You think a trust fund brings Sarah back? No. Evelyn's voice finally cracked. A single tear escaped, tracking down her pale cheek. I don't expect your forgiveness, Alaric. I don't deserve it. You should hate me for the rest of your life. This money isn't an apology. It's oxygen. It's a house in a clean neighborhood where there is no mold. It's the best pediatric pulmonologists in the world. It's the life she was supposed to have before I ruined it. Alaric looked at the small envelope. He thought of the damp, freezing apartment. He thought of the duct-taped sink. He thought of the moment Lily's lips turned blue in his arms. I pulled you out of that car, Alaric whispered, the cruel irony of the universe threatening to break him all over again. I reset your shoulder. I kept you from bleeding out on the asphalt. I know. Evelyn bowed her head. You saved a life, and now you get to take one away. The folder is the gun, Alaric. Pick it up and pull the trigger. She didn't wait for him to answer. She turned and walked out of the hospital room, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind her. Alaric stood alone in the quiet hum of the machinery. He looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling. Then he looked at the folder. The keys to his vengeance. The keys to his freedom. He reached out and opened it. The fall of the Croft Empire was not a quiet affair. It was a spectacle that dominated the 24-hour news cycle for 6 straight months. It started with a raid. Federal agents stormed the Croft Medical headquarters in downtown Seattle, seizing hard drives, filing cabinets, and servers. An hour later, Charles Croft was arrested at his country club, marched out in handcuffs past a swarm of paparazzi. But the image that truly broke the internet was Evelyn Croft. She didn't hide behind a wall of expensive lawyers. She didn't issue a sanitized PR statement. She walked into the district courthouse, her right arm fully healed, wearing a simple gray suit. She stood before a judge, waived her right to a trial by jury, and pled guilty to felony vehicular manslaughter, felony leaving the scene of an accident, and conspiracy to commit fraud. When the judge asked her if she had anything to say before sentencing, Evelyn stood up. 5 years ago, I made a choice that destroyed a family, she said, her voice clear and carrying across the packed courtroom. My father's money bought me a temporary illusion of innocence, but guilt is a debt that accrues interest. I am here to pay the principal. The judge gave her 15 years, without parole. Alaric watched the sentencing on a flat-screen television in the living room of a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. The house smelled of fresh paint and pine needles. Large bay windows let in the afternoon sun, casting warm pools of light on the hardwood floors. There was no mold here. There were no drafts. It was a fortress of safety. Alaric muted the television as the camera zoomed in on Evelyn being led away in handcuffs. He didn't feel a triumphant rush of victory. He didn't feel a surge of vindication. He just felt incredibly, profoundly tired. Revenge, he realized, was a cold meal. It didn't bring Sarah back to the kitchen to cook Sunday morning pancakes. It didn't erase the phantom pain in his knee, or the 5 years of terror he had endured. Evelyn was in a cage, and Charles was facing the rest of his life behind bars. The scales of justice had been violently, aggressively balanced, but Alaric was still a widower. "Daddy," Alaric turned. Lily came running down the hallway. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress. Her cheeks were flushed with healthy color, her eyes bright and clear. She wasn't wheezing. She wasn't coughing. She crashed into his legs, wrapping her arms around his knees. Alaric smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his tired eyes. He scooped her up, lifting her high into the air. She giggled, the sound echoing through the spacious, clean house. "What are you doing running in the house, Bug?" Alaric asked, setting her on his hip. "I was looking for my crayons," she said, pointing towards the kitchen. "I want to draw a picture for the fridge." "Go get them," Alaric said, setting her down. He watched her run into the kitchen. He took a deep breath. The air was clean. Alaric walked over to the mantel above the fireplace. He had finally unpacked the boxes he had kept hidden for 5 years. Sarah's pictures were everywhere now. Her smiling face looked back at him from silver frames. He touched the edge of a frame, showing Sarah holding newborn Lily. "We made it," Alaric whispered to the photograph. "We're safe now." He didn't forgive Evelyn Croft. He knew he never would. Some sins were too large, too catastrophic to be washed away by a guilty plea and a trust fund. But as Alaric stood in his quiet, safe home, listening to his daughter hum a tune in the next room, he realized something else. He didn't have to carry the hatred anymore. Evelyn had given him the folder so he could destroy her. But in doing so, she had destroyed the ghost that had been hunting him. She had burned down the system that kept him in the dark. Alaric walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood. Kids were riding bicycles on the sidewalk. A neighbor was watering their lawn. It was a mundane, boring, incredibly normal Tuesday. It was everything he had ever wanted. Alaric Pendleton finally let out a long, slow breath, turning his back on the television screen and walking into the kitchen to help his daughter color. The storm was over. Alaric finally got his justice, but more importantly, he got his daughter's future back. Evelyn didn't just pay her debt. She burned her own empire to the ground to do it. It is a harsh reminder that sometimes the only way to fix a shattered world is to let the architects of the lie destroy themselves. Drop a comment below, letting me know if Evelyn's final sacrifice earned her any redemption, or if she got exactly what she deserved. If this story hit hard, smash that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more raw, grounded fiction.